So welcome to New Frontiers of Openness, Advancing Budget Transparency and Accountability in the MENA region. My name is Holger Flörkemeyer. I'm the director of the IMF Middle East Regional Technical Assistance Center in Beirut, Lebanon. And this event is a co-production of IMF METAC and the IMF's Fiscal Affairs and Middle East and Central Asia Department and the International Budget Partnership with support from the European Union. Let me introduce you to the speakers of today. We will have opening remarks by Mr. Mathieu Bousquet. Mr. Bousquet is the acting director of the Directorate General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations of the European Commission. He is the acting director of new DG NEAR A, that is thematic support, policy coordination, and financial instruments. I looked it up. It's the longest department name that DG NEAR has to offer. So he will give us some opening remarks, and the European Commission is a supporter of both IMF METAC and the IBP, the International Budget Partnership. Our moderator today is Ms. Ana Patricia Munoz, Executive Director of the International Budget Partnership. And we have as moderators Mr. Ahmed Kouchouk, Vice Minister of Finance in Egypt, responsible for fiscal policy and institutional reform. Unfortunately, Mr. Kouchouk had to cancel his trip to Marrakesh, but he will hopefully connect with us online and will be with us in this event. Then we have Mr. Yassin Naciri. He is the President of the Financial Chamber of the Court of Auditors in Morocco. We have Ms. Katherine Baer, the Deputy Director of the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department. And we have Karim Trabelsi. He is the economic expert of the General Labor Union of Tunisia. So our agenda is some opening remarks. Then Ms. Munoz will give a short presentation to frame the topic. Then we will have the panel discussion, and then we conclude with a Q&A session where you can ask us questions, both in the room and also online. So this is a hybrid event. If you are following us online, please type your questions in the chat. So thank you very much, and over to you, Mr. Bousquet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. It's really a pleasure to be here today and to provide opening remarks on this extremely relevant subject of budget transparency and accountability in the MENA region. So I'll start with some words about why fiscal transparency and budget accountability matter. Fiscal transparency provides legislatures, markets, and citizens with the information they need to hold governments accountable for their use of public resources. On the other side, a lack of fiscal transparency can undermine accountability and also provide opportunities for the misappropriation of public funds. Efficient and equitable management of public funds requires fiscal systems that are transparent, inclusive, and monitored through strong, independent oversight institutions. Fiscal transparency and budget oversight require the involvement of many stakeholders. Of course, the Ministry of Finance, but also the Parliament, the Supreme Audit institutions, and of course the citizens. And the panel we have, brings these different perspectives. Openness and accountability can strengthen fiscal discipline, reduce opportunities for corruption, but also lower borrowing costs. This is also contributing to create an environment which is conducive to private sector development and foreign investment. Greater transparency in public accounts is also a good way to address a growing distrust between citizens and governments, and this is valid in the whole world. So this is why the involvement of a large range of stakeholders, including civil society, can help to improve the social contract. Maybe 2 words about the EU policy context. Fostering good economic governance, transparency, and accountability is at the heart of the relationship from EU with the southern neighborhood, the MENA region. This is highlighted in the joint communication of a renewed partnership with the southern neighborhood of 2021 under the priority rule of law, modern and effective administrations, governance and accountability. By contributing towards improving governance and accountability and strengthening policy frameworks, we can help to build resilience. The need for resilient economies among our partner countries are emphasized by this communication, but also the associated economic and investment plan. Also, the need to work with civil society figures prominently in this policy framework. So maybe the third point, and the last point of my intervention, is how do we support at EU level these priorities? Support to fiscal transparency and budget accountability is clearly a key feature of our cooperation with partner countries. The EU works at different levels with a variety of interlocutors, combining different instruments of the EU toolbox: capacity building, institutional strengthening through twinning and TIEX, but also projects. And of course, enhancing the level of budget and fiscal transparency are key elements of our budget support and our macro-financial assistance. So it's very important that there is progress in these elements. At regional level, we have a long-standing collaboration with the IMF METAC, and we support capacity development for ministries of finance and central banks in the southern neighborhood region through provision of highly relevant expertise. But through consultation with civil society, we have identified also the need to involve citizens and civil society in budget monitoring to nurture an environment in which budget priorities are actively debated. This is why we decided to collaborate with the International Budget Partnership to promote capacity building of civil society organizations. We are therefore supporting a regional program with IBP to foster public access to budget information, create opportunities for public participation in budget processes, but also equip civil society groups with the skills to analyze and to engage with governments in a constructive dialogue. I'm therefore extremely happy that this event on New Frontiers of Openness is taking place today as a partnership between the EU, IMF METAC, and the IBP. It's a win-win situation when we all join efforts, donors, ministries of finance, central banks, state audit institutions, and civil society representatives. So looking very much forward to a lively and interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much all for being here today. I'm going to add my welcome to Mathieu and just to share what he ended, which is promoting a constructive dialogue. And that's why for the International Budget Partnership, it is an honor and we're delighted to co-host this event today with the IMF METAC office with the support of the European Union. IBP has been working for more than 25 years to make sure that public funds are raised and spent in a transparent and equitable manner. And if you think about it, budget is in our name, but it's not just a word. Budgets are really, or should be, a reflection of a country's priorities. And if it's a reflection of a country's priorities, then it should sound normal that the needs of the communities are part of that discussion. And we have been doing so with constructive dialogue, including civil society organizations, think tanks, technical groups, international financial institutions, and more community-based organizations, grassroots movements, showing the power and the potential of transforming people's lives through better budget processes. Now, we're going to talk today about the challenges the MENA region is facing in terms of transparency and accountability, but thinking about it as a door of opportunities. And we'll hear more from our panelists about what those opportunities are. Now, it's no surprise the entire world is facing a myriad of challenges. civil society and the civic space has been reduced all over the world, instability, climate crisis, so on and so on. In addition to that, the MENA region is one of the most unequal regions in the world. And I have to say, unfortunately, that is very similar to what I experienced in my home region, Latin America. We do share other things, the love for food. I think the love for dancing is something we share. And unfortunately, I think we do share this. We are getting used to saying that our regions are the most unequal regions in the world. We cannot get used to saying that. And that means if our regions are unequal, there are even more opportunities to make things better, to make better policy choices. And we are here to offer some of those solutions. I also cannot stress enough what was mentioned already in the beginning of the opening remarks Mathieu mentioned, is that the importance of supporting civil society as well as governments will allow us to find new pathways. And so because of that, thanks to the European Union support, the IBP will be able to measure, to add more countries to the measurement of the Open Budget Survey that is already being implemented in 125 countries. I'm going to show you a little bit of the results from those, from that survey, long-standing survey. And thanks to this support, we are being able to add more countries, and we're specifically working with Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, and Palestine, in not only measuring transparency and accountability, but supporting a bench of stakeholders from the civil society, both technical group, but also activists and social movements, to better understand what are the tools available in this budget cycle, and of course, be able to influence it. So to provide more context to the conversation today, I'm going to share, I think it's 5 slides, so we're going to get to our panelists, which is the most important part of the conversation today. And the quick highlights that I'm going to share with you today come from this joint note that you can find it available online too, so I hope you can go get it, read it, comment on it, share your perspectives, look through the data, look at the 140 indicators if you are among those people who like indicators, and really see some of the highlights that I'm going to share with you today. This note is a joint effort by IMF METAC office, but the UNDP, and of course the International Budget Partnership, which tracks information from the Open Budget Survey, but also includes other data sets like the Supreme Audit Institutions Index, Freedom House Index, and the PIFA audit reports and indicators as well. I mentioned already that the Open Budget Survey tracks this index in 125 countries. For the presentation today, I'm going to focus on the 11 countries that are relevant to our conversation, starting in 2015, because that's the year where we have most data for most of these 11 countries. But if you're curious about it, we have data back to 2006 for some of them. So if you refer to the first chart, I'm not going to cite all of the indicators here. But if you see maybe 2 highlights. These are the different regions, if you will, the Budget Transparency Index by region from 2015 from 2021. And so two trends here, or 2 things to pay attention to. One, of all the regions, unfortunately, the MENA region has the lower scores in the budget transparency indicators. Now, it's very important to mention here that the Open Budget Survey is the largest survey that's tracking independently 3 things at the same time: budget transparency, participation, and also accountability in terms of the role of audit institutions and parliaments. We're going to hear more about that today. So that combination, I think it's very powerful. And you can track it over time. So first thing, the lowest among the others. Now, of course, no region has 100 points, so nobody is perfect. But there's a lot of room of improvement there in the Middle East and North Africa regions. And the second thing is that, unfortunately, over time, that indicator has not moved much. So you can see a slight improvement from 19 to 21, but pretty much same thing that we were seeing in 2015. Now, as all averages do and all combined statistics do, that is just part of the story. Each country has a different score and different challenges, and that's something we're going to highlight again and again in the panel today. So just to illustrate this point, we can see the second chart here, where this allows me also to show the way we construct the Open Budget Survey. These are 8 different reports that we have been tracking for decades now. And you can see which countries do better in terms of publishing the reports online, on making them accessible, and then on making sure there's a process, for example, to have an audit report at the end. So for our host country, good news, you rank the highest among at least 3 different indicators. There's others where you're not showing up there, so pay attention to that. Lots to be done still. But of course, there are others that are not doing great. Now, there are very interesting examples, even in this challenging context, of things that have worked. And we're going to, again, hear a little bit of that today. And in the report, you're going to find several of those examples from the MENA region and from other regions as well. So those are some encouraging advances. Now, if you look at the last piece, it says the audit report. And we could focus on each one of the 140 questions and what's behind it. Let me just pause on this one, which is the oversight by institution, again, pooled in the region. And this is just for 2021. But if we were to look at 2015, actually, the picture will be even bleaker. Now, there are some bars that are higher than others, but again, in general, way lower than the 61 mark, which is the one we use as above 61, you can say there's adequate information for any country in this indicator. So most of the countries in most of the bars lower than 61, and there are some that are really low. The second thing I would like you to see is that we are here splitting the bars between legislative oversight and supreme audit institutions oversight, where you can see the legislative having a very limited role. Of course, this depends on the institutional arrangements of each country, but again, a lot to be done there, looking at best practices in other places. Now, in the report, you can see some examples, for example, on what Egypt, the government of Egypt, has done to improve public participation. Now, for IBP, it's very important to stress that participation should not be an exercise of ticking the box, right? It should be authentic, it should drive change, it should be coherent, it should be constant over time. And there's a very interesting also example on the new development model in Morocco of this public participation exercise to define priorities, including communities that have been marginalized over time. Our host can say whether that, how that has been working. Okay, so we're going to jump into the panel today. So things that, just to conclude, if you will, or to open up the conversation. Strength and transparency, those require more and better accessible information, but that is not enough. You heard from the opening remarks, this is about transparency and accountability. So if you will, transparency is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Very important, as you saw in the last chart, to work with both legislators and independent auditors to strengthen their capacities, their role, and the institutional arrangements. And this is not just for the sake of improving the OBS. We strongly believe, and some data has shown, that including transparency increases the public trust. It's useful to have a better social contract in this world where trade-offs need to be made. That's a great way to do it. And so there's still a lot of opportunities to overhaul the entire budget cycle, including institutions and legislation. So with that, you've heard that we already, from Holger, the great panelists that we have today. So we're going to hear from them. We're going to have 2 to 3 rounds of interventions, and then we would like to hear from all of you and from everybody who has been connected online. So I am going to move back to my seat while we wait for the Vice Minister of Finance of Egypt to show up on the screen. He is? Okay, great. to give me perfect. It's very efficient. And I'm going to apologize in advance. This is something I tell my kids not to do, which is have their phones and their computers and multitask. But we have people online, so I do need to look at several things at the same time, so I'm not distracted. I'm paying attention, so please forgive me, and we'll see if I can make this work. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Kouchouk, for being with us virtually. We understand the entire world is going through so many challenges now, but we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. So for you and all our panelists, please, I know you have a lot to say. 3 minutes each intervention. I'm going to cut you short, so again, apologize for that. I know it's going to happen, so I apologize in advance. So we'd love to hear, I mentioned Egypt in passing, and I did it quickly because it's great to hear from you directly. But first, let's hear about the challenges that you're seeing in promoting budget transparency from the perspective of the Ministry of Finance in Egypt.
For still accommodating my presence, even if I make it physically. And it's a great honor to be with you and with the great panel, a lot of friends also among them. So it's great to be with you. And I will try to stick also to your hard time ceiling. So that's very important. I think I will say two things about the challenges in general. Transparency is a journey, and one of the biggest challenges is that you need to have also relevant institutional setup as well as players in the country that you can work with to push reforms and to push the agenda. As you rightly said, it's not only about publishing report here or there. It's about the mindset that this is the right of the people and that you are providing more and more data, with better quality data over time, as well as the accessibility and the format of presenting this data is very important. So I think in general, a challenge that one faces is basically how to build the right institutional setup, how to work with the key stakeholders in the country, whether internal or even with some external supporters in that area. It's very important also for dealing with the challenges and mentioning some of the challenges is also to have a direct dialogue with stakeholders. We are all on the same page. We have different roles to play, but the executive branch and also the legislative branch need to have a very close dialogue and a relevant dialogue and an open dialogue, as well as with other stakeholders like for example, in our case, the Central Audit Agency, which is this dialogue, which in my talk today, I will explain more and more about some of the big things that we're doing now in Egypt, that we're able to do it by having this direct dialogue, very clear and very open. So I think, again, to make it short, having a dedicated team, relevant support, clear roadmap, as well as direct, open dialogue with all the key stakeholders.
Thank you so much also for being brief and for mentioning that this is also about mindsets and thinking about this as the right of people and different stakeholders. We'll get back to that on the second round. And I think we could hear most of what you said, especially the most important things. So thank you so much. Monsieur Naciri, now it was not coincidence that one of the slides was about the lack of oversight or the opportunities of improving the lack of oversight in the MENA region. So we'd love to hear a little bit from you on what do you think are the major challenges and need both for parliaments and the Supreme Audit institutions to improve that score, but more importantly, to make sure that the accountability loop and ecosystem is working.
Merci beaucoup pour votre question. Je commence d'abord par remercier les organisateurs pour cet événement, cette table ronde qui intéresse directement notre organisation en tant qu'institution supérieure de contrôle. C'est très bien que la transparence budgétaire intéresse tout le monde, intéresse le Parlement, intéresse les IIC ou les institutions supérieures de contrôle, mais intéresse aussi directement le citoyen, qui est la finalité de tous ces processus. Donc on est bien ravis et on remercie et particulièrement l'IBP pour avoir organisé cette table ronde. Pour ce qui est de la promotion de la transparence entre le Parlement et les institutions supérieures de contrôle, je dirais peut-être que je commencerai par le Parlement en tant que supervision, en tant que contrôle politique suprême de la transparence budgétaire entre autres politiques publiques. Je dirais que spécialement, je citerai quelques éléments pour promouvoir le rôle du Parlement dans la supervision et le contrôle de la transparence budgétaire. Évidemment, le Parlement doit disposer d'informations. Je crois que l'information est au cœur de ce sujet. Donc, le Parlement doit disposer d'une information en quantité et en qualité. Quand je dirais quantité, ça ne veut pas dire une diffusion, je dirais, un peu à n'importe comment, mais une présentation qui soit intelligible et bien compréhensible au niveau des parlementaires. Et aussi en quantité, c'est-à-dire le niveau de reporting sur toute l'année, comment on rapporte sur les budgets, sur les prévisions budgétaires, sur l'exécution budgétaire, mais aussi un élément très important, c'est le reporting à temps. Quand on tarde dans le reporting, ça n'a plus aucun sens, ça ne sert vraiment plus à animer le débat parlementaire qui est un peu au cœur du pouvoir de contrôle. Également, au niveau du Parlement, comme c'est des sujets un peu techniques, je crois qu'il y a lieu de développer des compétences techniques au sein du Parlement pour pouvoir un peu interroger le gouvernement sur les prévisions, l'exécution et le reporting sur le budget. Ça, je crois que c'est des éléments qui peuvent contribuer au niveau du Parlement dans la promotion de la transparence budgétaire. Au niveau du Maroc, on a fait beaucoup de chemin dans ce sens. Donc, depuis déjà, avec la Constitution de 2011 et avec particulièrement la loi organique des finances de 2015, et on a enrichi le niveau d'information fourni par le gouvernement au Parlement. Maintenant, essentiellement, si je résume ça au niveau du projet de loi de finances, il est maintenant accompagné de 14 rapports et notes qui traitent des sujets les plus importants et qui intéressent directement aussi bien le Parlement que les citoyens. Je crois que c'est des éléments très, très importants. Également, la loi organique des finances a introduit des éléments de gestion moderne, je crois, qui peuvent contribuer dans ce sens de la transparence budgétaire. Je citerai là essentiellement la programmation budgétaire triennale qui ne se limite pas sur l'exécution de ce qui a été fait, mais essentiellement, elle donne un peu le cap sur un horizon de 3 ans, ce qui oblige un peu le gouvernement à tracer un peu la tendance de ce qui, à travers ses prévisions, pour pouvoir un peu comparer par la suite, et ça donne un élément de comparaison très, très, très important. Aussi, un autre élément qui concerne une démarche de performance qui vient d'être instaurée depuis 2019 et qui, à mon sens, contribue aussi dans l'instauration de cette transparence à travers des objectifs clairs, à travers des indicateurs mesurables. Et là, ça donne quand même au niveau du Parlement la possibilité de suivre ces indicateurs et ces objectifs pour s'assurer un peu de leur réalisation et constater s'il y a lieu des écarts et apporter un peu les correctifs nécessaires. C'est un travail qui se fait conjointement avec des travaux de la Cour des comptes et j'arrive là au rôle de l'IIC comme Cour des comptes du Maroc, comment il contribue dans ce sens. Mais avant ça, je crois que déjà pour pouvoir contribuer dans ce grand sujet de transparence budgétaire, je crois que chaque institution supérieure de contrôle doit pouvoir disposer d'un mandat clair qui lui permet de contrôler tout le processus budgétaire depuis la prévision jusqu'à l'exécution, jusqu'à le reporting et l'audit de réalisation. Donc, et en plus de ça, il doit jouir aussi d'une indépendance claire qui est garantie au niveau de l'institution, au niveau de ses membres et au niveau de ses contrôles. Je crois que là sont les éléments, à mon sens, les plus importants pour promouvoir un peu la transparence budgétaire au niveau du Parlement et au niveau des institutions supérieures de contrôle.
Fantastique, merci beaucoup. Une phrase que vous avez dite que je pense très importante, la transparence budgétaire intéresse tout le monde. Et vous avez parlé de qualité, quantité, mais aussi de capacités techniques. Et le dernier mot, c'est l'indépendance, très important. We do have translation in the room. I don't think we have translation for everybody who's connected. We do have translation. Great. We got thumbs up. Oh, and I see that Mr. Vice Minister is nodding. That's great. That's a great surprise. Fantastic. Great. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Naciri. Now, I think I've mentioned enough times the importance of civil society. So if that message has not come across enough, we are going to hear from Mr. Trablesi. And I love how it's easier to pronounce in Spanish to get the
Yeah.
travel
You
to
can
travel.
pronounce it like
I asked and they told me travel. Okay.
Yeah.
Forgive me for the wrong pronunciation. So lots to be able to hear from you. In this first question, maybe if you could focus on the advocacy strategies and the challenges to implement those advocacy strategies from the civil society as it relates, of course, to transparency and accountability in the public funds uses and allocation.
Merci à l'IBP pour m'avoir associé à ce panel. Et, avant de répondre à votre question directement, Madame Mounet, je voudrais commenter très rapidement la présentation de cadrage que vous avez exposée. Il est vrai que la région MENA est confrontée à des énormes défis en matière de transparence budgétaire. La preuve que la région figure parmi les derniers dans le classement de la dernière enquête sur le budget ouvert. Mais n'empêche que la région a réalisé une avancée significative durant les 10 dernières années, du moins en ce qui concerne 3 pays, la Tunisie, le Maroc et l'Égypte et la Jordanie aussi. Et donc il faudrait voir l'évolution de l'enquête depuis 2011 jusqu'à maintenant pour pouvoir bien évaluer la situation. Et dans ces avancées significatives, il est vrai qu'il y a eu des décisions politiques favorables, il y avait de nouvelles lois, etc. Mais du moins en ce qui concerne la Tunisie, il y avait aussi une société civile très engagée qui a contribué significativement à ces améliorations. Je voudrais parler de l'exemple de mon pays, la Tunisie. Comme vous savez, la Tunisie a connu un processus de transition démocratique depuis 2011. Malheureusement, ce processus, il est en train de piétiner aujourd'hui, on doit l'admettre. Il y a des risques qui menacent sérieusement tous ces acquis démocratiques, et ces risques se sont répercutés négativement sur le niveau de transparence budgétaire. L'année dernière, c'est la première année dans laquelle le projet de budget n'a pas été publié avant sa promulgation de la part du président de la République. Il y a un discours maintenant qui émerge, il dit pourquoi on publie un projet de budget? Vous avez élu un parlement qui représente le peuple, et voilà, c'est votre représentant qui a la légitimité de discuter les budgets et les mesures budgétaires. On dit toujours, en tant que civil society, assez partisan d'un tel discours, qu'il y a des forces vives dans n'importe quel pays en dehors de la sphère politique. C'est vrai que le Parlement est légitime, mais en dehors de la sphère politique, il y a une société civile, il y a des syndicats, il y a des citoyens aussi, il y a des journalistes, il y a des universitaires, il y a des experts. Donc, et de là, et tous ces acteurs ont le droit de discuter ce budget et sont concernés par la discussion du budget. En On parle de transparence, d'accountability, d'oversight, mais il y a aussi un concept qu'on devrait aussi considérer, c'est la crédibilité de l'information budgétaire. Parfois, l'information est disponible, mais n'est pas crédible, voire fausse dans certains cas. Quand on planifie un budget sur la base de 5% de croissance, et après on réalise seulement 1%, et ça se répète d'une année à une autre, et on rectifie le budget par une loi qui intervient en milieu d'année. Donc là, tout le budget est biaisé. Donc c'est bien de publier les informations budgétaires, d'impliquer aussi les parties prenantes dans la discussion de toutes les décisions budgétaires, mais aussi il faudrait une information qui soit crédible, qui soit proche de la réalité. Voilà, je termine avec cette remarque. Merci.
Allô? Merci beaucoup. Très important de ce qu'on a écouté juste maintenant. Il y a eu une amélioration dans les lois, spécialement en Tunisie, Maroc, Égypte, la Jordanie. En part parce qu'il y a eu une société civile active. Je pense que c'est important de remarquer ça. La dernière chose que vous avez dite aussi, la crédibilité de l'information est peut-être aussi importante que l'information même. Et on va revenir aux stratégies que la société civile a utilisées en Tunisie. Great. Now I'm going to turn it to Madame Baer to hear a little bit more about, I mean, you've been working, overseeing, depending on your role, more than 80 countries. So it'll be great to hear a kind of broader perspective about the challenges in budget transparency, but in general, in fiscal transparency and accountability.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel and to hear from you and from the colleagues in Morocco and Tunisia. It's really a pleasure. So let me start by telling you a little bit about how the IMF works with our member countries on promoting not only fiscal transparency, but good public financial management. That includes all the processes related to budget formulation, budget execution, monitoring of the execution, because after all, fiscal transparency is just one aspect of a broader process. And so on fiscal transparency itself, the IMF does have a fiscal transparency code, and that's the international standard for disclosure of information about the public finances. And I thought I would just say a little bit about the detail of such a code, because when one hears about that, it sounds great, but what is it exactly? So it has 4 pillars. One is fiscal reporting, and that's the report should offer relevant, comprehensive, timely, and reliable information. To Mr. Trablosi's point on the accuracy of information regarding the government's financial position and performance. The second pillar has to do with fiscal forecasting and budgeting, which should provide a clear statement of the government's budgetary objectives and policy intentions, together with comprehensive, timely, and credible projections of the evolution of the public finances. Again, going back to a comment from Mr. Trablosi, thinking about, well, what about the effects of changes in the economy on the budget projections? The third pillar has to do with fiscal risk analysis and management, which should ensure that the risks to the public finances are disclosed, analyzed, and well managed, and that fiscal decision-making across the public sector is effectively coordinated. This is an important aspect of fiscal transparency. And last pillar has to do with resource revenue management, which should provide a transparent framework for the resource ownership and extraction and the collection and utilization of public revenues from natural resource endowments. So this just gives you a little bit more of a concrete idea of what the fiscal transparency evaluations are all about. The IMF has worked with our country partners to conduct 46 fiscal transparency evaluations covering 40 countries, which is much less than the 80 that you mentioned. And 2 of those are in the region, Jordan and Tunisia, in 2016. So what are some of the areas of vulnerability in fiscal transparency that have shown up? These are often related to state-owned enterprises, where disclosure of the fiscal risks is often limited. And these state-owned enterprises often play a large role in the economies in the region. A second area that's challenging is public-private partnerships and the fiscal risks that those pose. And some countries have started to venture into such arrangements without really not understanding or taking into account the long-term budget implications and often not disclosing the fiscal risks that have emerged in the process. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, overall fiscal transparency connects back to the presentation on budget transparency that we heard about, a concern about budget credibility, what is promised in the budget or what is implemented. The priority should be that countries transparently plan and implement budgets so that the promises for the use of public resources are disclosed. And one last, I think, very important point that I'd like to make has to do about the link between budgets and public expenditure and revenue collection. We know that in the MENA region, the average tax to GDP ratio is quite low, around 11 points of GDP, and that needs to be increased on the order of doubling that tax to GDP ratio to allow countries to have sufficient spending to undertake their public investment programs and to reach their development goals. But in order to promote compliance with taxation, so budget transparency and budget accuracy and the reporting of the expenditure is really a very critical aspect of that, as you all have mentioned in your comments, to promote citizens and the society overall's credibility in the effectiveness of how those public resources are used.
Thank you so much. A few key highlights already, which is not just about the fiscal transparency, but the entire process and the public finance management as well. And two things that are coming up even more in the future as the fiscal space has been reduced is the state-owned enterprises and the public-private partnership, which is becoming a norm in some of our countries, I guess, out of, in some cases, good decisions, and others out of desperation of having no money in public finance. And this very important highlight of looking both at revenue and expenditures. Please keep on writing your questions. We're going to have a lively discussion at the end. We're going to do a second round right now. I'm going to please ask you to be, you were great, but if you could have even shorter answers this time, just because we want to get to everybody's questions. So now, we heard a little bit about the challenges and key things to consider when we're talking about transparency and accountability. Let's look forward. What can we expect? What changes, reforms? All these great panels are already seen or seeding, and that can be maybe replicated and taken into account for others. I'm going to mix up the order of participants just to make this more fun. So, Monsieur Naciri, on va commencer avec vous. And it'll be great to hear a little bit more about what you started saying already, about what the Supreme Audit institutions have changed that you think others should take into account. I really liked how you linked your remarks on the work that the Parliament does and the information they need and the oversight, and that you said you work very closely with them, the Supreme Audit institutions and Parliament. So what are the additional support mechanisms that you think both institutions need and others in other countries should consider to improve the accountability ecosystem?
Merci pour la question. Je crois que je vais commencer la réponse par les éléments là où j'ai terminé ma première réponse. Essentiellement, pour commencer avec les institutions supérieures de contrôle que je représente ici, pour dire qu'une institution supérieure de contrôle, tout en connaissant son rôle vis-à-vis du gouvernement ou vis-à-vis du citoyen, mais aussi vis-à-vis du Parlement, pour lui offrir, comme la matière est technique, comment il peut produire de l'information pertinente pour le Parlement pour exercer son rôle de contrôle. Mais avant ça, je crois qu'il est important pour chaque institution supérieure de contrôle de jouir d'un mandat très clair, un mandat qui brasse tout le processus budgétaire, qui n'ait pas de limite, une limite plus ou moins imposées à l'institution supérieure pour exercer son contrôle. Quand je dis mandat, ça va de pair avec son indépendance. L'indépendance est très, très importante pour pouvoir apporter une appréciation, une évaluation indépendante et crédible. Et par là, je reviens un peu à la déclaration de Lima sur l'indépendance des institutions supérieures de contrôle, pour citer que l'indépendance vise l'indépendance déjà de l'institution, l'indépendance de ses membres qui doivent être indépendants, encadrés par un code éthique qui assure un peu leurs actions. Mais même si on a cette indépendance bien inscrite dans une loi ou dans une constitution, je crois qu'il y a aussi un élément pendant de l'indépendance qui est les moyens. Et quand on parle de moyens, c'est les moyens budgétaires et les ressources dont disposent ces institutions qui doivent être en mesure de leur permettre d'exercer leur mission de façon confortable et efficace. Ils doivent aussi avoir cette indépendance en matière de programmation et en matière de reporting. Ils doivent pouvoir rapporter sur leurs travaux de façon très, très, très libre. Donc, si on résume ça, dans la plupart de nos institutions, on trouve que cette indépendance est écrite quelque part dans une loi ou dans une constitution. Je cite ça pour dire que la simple inscription de ces dispositions dans une loi ou dans une constitution n'est pas suffisante. L'indépendance doit être exercée de façon réelle et effective. Et pour ça, il y a des conditions qui doivent être réunies et exercées dans la réalité. Maintenant, si on ne dispose pas de tous ces éléments, si on n'a pas tout à fait ce mandat ou cette indépendance, je crois qu'il y a là un rôle au niveau des institutions supérieures de contrôle pour agir sur le législateur pour faire avancer un peu sa situation. Je vais citer là deux éléments qui me paraissent les plus importants. C'est que les IIC, pour pouvoir montrer un peu leur utilité, doivent être exemplaires. Doivent être exemplaires dans leur action. Sur le plan éthique, je crois qu'ils doivent être irréprochables au niveau de l'institution comme au niveau de ses membres. Donc, ça, c'est sur le plan éthique, mais aussi sur le plan performance. Ils doivent être capables de produire des travaux avec une performance très, très claire qui montre un peu l'utilité et la valeur ajoutée de leurs travaux. Et autre point, le deuxième point, c'est au niveau du choix, quand on a des limites budgétaires ou une limite de mandat, je crois qu'il est important de développer une priorisation des actions de ces institutions supérieures pour agir et pour choisir les thèmes les plus importants et les plus pertinents qui apportent de la valeur ajoutée et qui ont de l'impact sur le citoyen. Là, tous ces travaux, je crois, et toutes ces conditions peuvent contribuer dans la promotion du rôle des IIC et peuvent aller jusqu'à agir à un peu bousculer les choses vers plus d'indépendance qui peut être inscrite même au niveau d'une constitution. Je vois là un peu ce qu'on peut faire à l'état actuel.
Merci. Un peu plus de détails alors sur l'indépendance, qui doit être une indépendance de l'institution, mais aussi des membres de l'institution, et aussi en avoir les moyens. Dépendance sans moyens, ça ne va pas marcher. Et une chose très importante aussi, qu'on l'a vu dans le travail de IBP, c'est que la loi, elle est très importante, mais elle n'est pas suffisante. Donc très, très importante chose à considérer. Et, Monsieur Trabelsi, we'd love now to hear a little bit more about the strategies that civil society have implemented to contribute to this process. In the opening, we heard about this constructive dialogue. And I think many times a civil society is seen as the enemy when it could be the critical friend. Critical still, but contribute to improvement. So what strategies have worked à la Tunisie pour améliorer la transparence?
En fait, il y a plusieurs cas de réussite, de bonnes pratiques en Tunisie, dans lesquels la société civile a joué un rôle important. J'appartiens à l'UGTT, qui est la centrale syndicale en Tunisie. Et juste pour citer un exemple, en 2017, l'UGTT a travaillé en partenariat avec le ministère des Finances pour revoir le barème de prélèvement des impôts sur les personnes physiques. C'était une commission technique dans laquelle on a partagé l'information, on a fait des simulations, des scénarios possibles, et on est arrivé, à travers le dialogue social, à revoir et à réviser ce barème de prélèvement de manière à alléger le fardeau fiscal sur les catégories les plus vulnérables et de l'alourdir un peu sur les personnes riches. On est arrivé à un tableau fiscal plus progressif et plus équitable, alors que les recettes fiscales n'ont pas été touchées. Donc on peut préserver les mêmes recettes pour l'État, mais en jouant sur les taux de manière à instaurer un système plus progressif et plus équitable. C'était juste un exemple, mais dans une perspective plus globale de la société civile, on travaille sur 2 voies d'amélioration de la transparence budgétaire. La première voie, elle concerne des améliorations qui peuvent être faites à travers une simple décision politique ou administrative. Il s'agit d'informations qui sont disponibles, qui sont produites, mais qui ne sont pas publiées. Je parle particulièrement du projet de budget en Tunisie qui n'a pas été publié l'année dernière. Je parle aussi du rapport d'audit en Tunisie, mais dans d'autres pays, qui est publié après 2 ans, voire 3 ans après la clôture de l'année budgétaire, de manière à ce qu'il perde complètement son sens. Ce genre de réforme, je pense que c'est notre priorité, parce que c'est faisable à court terme. Mais en parallèle, il y a des améliorations possibles qui nécessitent des réformes plus substantielles. Je parle, par exemple, de la comptabilisation des actifs de l'État. Le passage d'une comptabilité de caisse entrée-sortie à une comptabilité à partie double qui prend en considération les amortissements, les actifs de l'État, les entreprises publiques, etc. Ça pourrait paraître technique, mais c'est très important en termes de redevabilité. Parce que je donne un exemple juste très simple. Si une administration publique achète en 2023 un ordinateur, par exemple, en 2024, dans le budget 2024, on ne trouve aucune trace de cet ordinateur. Donc, on comptabilise juste les entrées et les sorties, c'est comme une comptabilité de caisse. Donc, pour avoir plus de visibilité, plus de redevabilité budgétaire, on doit migrer progressivement vers un système de finances publiques à partie double qui prend en considération non seulement les flux financiers, mais aussi les biens de l'État et les actifs financiers de l'État.
Merci beaucoup. On a écouté déjà 2 sortes de décisions qui sont importantes, ou 2 voies. Des décisions qui sont plutôt simples, ou au moins qu'on ne recule pas dans les choses qui arrivaient déjà, c'est le minimum. Mais aussi des réformes plus substantielles qui, vous avez dit, il semble technique, mais je peux dire aussi, ça doit avoir aussi avec des décisions politiques. Donc c'est technique, mais finalement, et on va écouter ça dans les réponses à la fin, qu'est-ce qui se passe avec la combinaison de technique et politique. One thing that I thought was fantastic, and it will open the eyes of many people around the world, which is the role that you mentioned of jointly working from civil society and labor unions and the government, which sounds an oxymoron in many places, on tax reform. Like those 3 things in the same sentence seem impossible. So I think this is a great example for a lot of civil society organizations and governments hearing us today and in the future. Now, we heard already about the assessment that the IMF has been doing and the 4 pillars and what you've been finding as challenges in the MENA region. But Ms. Baer, what from other regions you think this region can learn in terms of improving the entire cycle and process of fiscal management?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And let me just highlight a couple of the things that we have seen in other regions. and as both of you have indicated too, what's happening within this region that can be a good example, and I think that's really important. So I think one of the things we've seen is going directly to Mr. Trabelsi's comments, which are strengthening budget processes, the accuracy of budget data, shifting from cash-based to accrual-based accounting, and having an accounting of the assets of the state, and having as full a picture as possible of the financial and budgetary situation, that we have seen that really makes a difference in terms of fiscal transparency. So we have these wonderful tools, the fiscal transparency evaluation, we have these standards, but there's no doubt that countries that have improved their underlying budget processes are the ones that have introduced greater fiscal transparency. So that's one sort of set of observations. The other is the importance, as Mr. Naciri has said, of strengthening the government institutions. So governments really must invest in improving both the central budget formulating, executing, monitoring function through the government, through the Ministry of Finance, or where the budget process is housed, and also what is the process of auditing and following this function. And so we have seen that supreme audit institutions and Parliament and other institutions need to play a stronger role to promote fiscal transparency and push for reforms, and that, just as you said, they need to be independent and they need to be adequately resourced, and really importantly, they need to be trained and have the capacity to be able to know what to audit, how to audit, and why they're auditing what they do. So audit itself needs to be strengthened. And other institutions and central statistics offices can also help promote fiscal transparency reforms. There are many examples in the region, such as the Institute of Finance in Lebanon and Fiscal Transparency Unit in Egypt. So those are two of the points I'd like to point out on what other countries are doing. And finally, a very important point that I think both of you have made is this aspect of civil society's engagement in the public finances. And I would like to point out that we're working with a number of countries to promote what we call medium-term revenue strategies on the tax side, where one of the aspects is definitely working with governments to go out beyond government agencies into the entire society, civil society, business associations, academic circles, to try and reach a broader understanding of what the tax system is, and then and also to gain a better footing to have this social contract that's so important. So I just wanted to mention that on the tax side, and I believe that one of the things that is very much focused on in these exercises on fiscal transparency evaluations is on publishing them and then discussing them in a broader context, including with civil society.
Thank you so much. It's always great to have very concrete examples that we can turn to after the panel, so that's all fantastic. Thank you so much. Mr. Vice Minister, I guess anybody who heard the introduction or read the report must be wondering that how do you actually involve citizens? How has Egypt done it? How has it worked? How you would highlight this process from your experience?
Thank you. And I have been following a lot of the discussion, but can you give me also 1 minute? I just want to say a couple of things also about what we're trying also to do, and then I will come back and zoom a bit on the citizen participation and how to involve and create a system and create a process that allow this to happen in a very informative way. But there are very important things that have been mentioned, and let me also share our recent experience on a couple of things about that makes a big difference. I think a couple of big remarks, big reforms recently in our case that can change, that is also open the way and open the way for better and fiscal and budget transparency. let me mention that recently our Central Audit Agency, our oversight institution, published for the first time its final account, its report on our final account on the budget as well as all economic authorities. And now they are even changing the law itself to make this mandatory, not only to publish it, but to make it mandatory. And this was a big change and big reform because it also can give to everybody more detailed assessment about the budget, the performance, and how things are moving in that regard. Another very important reform that we are almost on the verge of publishing also is that we are publishing for the first time our also tax expenditure report in Egypt. It's something very important to tell the public and the people more details about our revenues and the foregone revenues, and also not only the foregone revenues, but also the revenue that we are like redirecting for the social protection as well as for other very reasonable and very justifiable cases. Those are important, for example, about the quality of the information, not only about the information itself, about the quality of information, and about getting everybody's views available for the public. Let me also say something that was also maybe not well covered usually by the standards of some of the assessments, but I think it's very important to keep also those in mind. Two very important things. Recently, we have been moving towards more issuance of green financing tools. In Egypt, we did a green bond and then working on also sustainable bond issuances. But in between, this has required us to also publish and issue our green financing framework that later we turned it into a sustainable financing framework. And this has to be published according to best practices and to national standards so that you can bring the right investors into the country. And in those, there is a lot of information and data and about the commitments of the country, about what they're doing, and also about the projects themselves and how they affect the people, how they can make a big changes in the people's lives. And we have to monitor this for the entire life of our issuances and to have also reports being published on that. This is one. This is not something quite common in this domain when we talk about transparency, but it's the core about that. It's core about sharing to the public and to the investors and to everybody more about the plans and the commitment of the country when it comes to green financing or climate issues or even sustainable issues. And then the last on that regard is the public expenditure review report that we did extensively with the World Bank that cover education, health, and social protection, and that we published also that gave a lot of information about, from also independent entities about how the track of spending on those three important files, but also what to be done. So again, availing more and more information, availing more quality information, more third-party opinions is important. It does not take from the government, it adds to it. It gives us more options, it gives us more also better arguments and better even discussion on the public. And finally, you said something very interesting and about citizen engagement. And I think this is our entire focus now, one of the top priority now. This is why our also team in the ministry is spending a lot of time, because this takes a lot of time. It needs to find the right champions, it needs to find the right NGOs and the people to work with, but also to find also people at the local level, at the government level, that are also ready to take this process. Because what we do is that we're working now in two governorates with a consortium of NGOs where we go and talk early in the process about our budget, what is being spent, what are the projects being done, what are the and then we get feedback about the priorities. Is this is exactly what we should be doing? Should we be doing something else? And in those meetings we have with us the governors and their teams, hearing directly from the people, and also the people hearing directly from us about the budget and how to turn those general numbers that are being presented usually at the central level, even published at central level, but those are general numbers, but having the citizen turning those numbers into how it matters, how it affects you, what are the things that are being done in your area, in your street, in your neighborhood. So I think this is a very important issue, and we'll keep doing more there because it is the best way of connecting all or having a shortcut really between us, governors, people on the ground, on the executive side, but also the people and the NGOs on the same table, in the same room, and also close to where the money is being spent. I'm aware of the time, so I'll stop here before there is a lot to add. But again, I will finish by saying that authenticity, what you said, it's not about checking the tick marks and getting the biggest score. It's about really trying to make a difference for the people and trying to better use your resources in the most efficient way.
Thank you so much. You mentioned three things where it looks as if you had been on our brainstorming meetings at IBP. On tax expenditures, we've worked in Latin America, now in Africa, and tax expenditures. Many times tax expenditures are higher than the budgets for education and healthcare. Lots to be done there in terms of transparency and reform. And I would say joint reform with dialogue with civil society. I think there's a kind of a low-hanging fruit, maybe complicated, but there's, and then green finance. We've been in so many meetings where I think now there seems to be funds for financing green aspects, but the accountability ecosystem is not there. And working with local authorities and champions and reformers and including civil society, great points that we've also been thinking about. So we're going to take some questions from the audience and online. So I feel I've gotten a message that we don't have questions from our audience virtually, but you know, I think Holger was going to kind enough help us see if there's any questions from the audience. Please take advantage of these great panelists here. We have one there. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. My name is Ibrahim Ali from Libya. I'm asking for just how it's work for the good governance and anti-corruption help the budget transparency and accountability. So how it's come and how it's work for that. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe you can take a couple. If there's not, we can go with it. If you have, so it's great if you can say your name and your organization and country. And if you have any preference of the panel that you would like to respond, that will facilitate my role as well. So who would you like to direct your question to?
Directing my question to you. And my name is Ibrahim Ali from the Libyan Transparency Association. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll take another couple of questions. Don't be shy. You do? Okay, great.
Yes, a quick question. Andrew Roche from, based in Paris, from Phoenix Sama. I have a question about budgeting transparency on the liability side and the level of transparency that you think is appropriate for something like debt servicing, and whether or not the IMF is working with the World Bank on its debt transparency initiative.
So a question on the debt side. We've talked about revenues, expenditures, and debt is the third leg that needs to be on the table. So we'll see if, I think that's probably a question for all the panelists today, and we can say something from IBP as well. So question on anti-corruption strategies on debt. And we do have one question from the audience that is virtual. But I will ask, it's a long one, so if somebody had read it already, they can rephrase it for me. They'll help me phrase it. Were you able to say it online?
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the question is about whether there may be too much of transparency, and if the process could be basically hijacked by vested groups to start influencing the budget process.
Is there something like too much transparency and taking it to the extreme so it paralyzes and hijacks the process? Very challenging and interesting question. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Hold your questions. We're going to have another round, and I'm going to ask, we have a counter, a timer there, so we can keep our answers short. So let me start with the debt question and accountability and how civil society is involved or not on the conversations that the IMF and the World Bank are having now. So maybe let me start from the IMF perspective.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's quite a broad question. And, you know, we have many teams, but in particular, the main country teams and those working on, debt issues, promoting the same kind of accuracy and timeliness on debt reporting, both from public debt and private debt. And this is always a challenge in countries whose overall statistical capacities can be not very strong. But definitely it's something that we work with very closely with many countries, and it's an ongoing effort. And there is technical assistance provided in this as well, and working very closely with the country teams that undertake either their surveillance or the IMF-supported program lending to the countries themselves.
Thank you so much. Any experience that you've seen of civil society being involved in the conversations about debt accountability from any of our other panelists? I don't know if you want to chime in. If there's nothing, that's a fair answer as well.
Bien sûr, la question de la dette est très importante pour la société civile. La Tunisie est parmi les pays les plus endettés dans la région, en proportion de son PIB, en proportion aussi de son nombre d'habitants. Et on a tendance, lorsqu'on parle de dette, de focaliser sur l'encours de la dette, c'est-à-dire debt outstanding, ce qui nous reste à payer. Mais on oublie un indicateur très important que la société civile voudrait considérer, c'est le service de la dette. Parce que le service de la dette, c'est un montant qu'on sacrifie dans le budget chaque année, et ce sacrifice se fait au détriment d'autres dépenses dans la santé, dans l'éducation, etc. Dans une dernière étude publiée par le syndicat, l'UGTT, l'organisation que je représente, nous avons pris acte d'une corrélation négative, quasi parfaite, entre l'augmentation du service de la dette d'une part et la diminution des investissements publics dans la santé et dans l'éducation. Donc si, dans notre vision de la question de la dette, c'est le service de la dette qui nous importe parce que ça touche directement les droits économiques et sociaux, comme l'exemple que je viens de citer.
Merci. And at IBP, we co-hosted another panel earlier in the week about domestic debt accountability. So a lot of work internationally on debt relief and global tables, but what about domestically? Is civil society part of that accountability? Because of what you're saying, what goes to service of the debt service doesn't go to other investments, and you mentioned, and therefore citizens should care about that. I'm sure there's a lot to be said on this, but I don't want to miss the other question, which is, it's pushing us to think beyond what we are offering here today, which is, can there be too much involvement of civil society or organizations in the process, too many interests at hand that then won't actually help to have an efficient and transparent process? And I'd love for Mr. Vice Minister to start with this question, and then we can come back to Monsieur Naciri.
No, I think it's all very relevant work, and I think part of also transparency is to make sure that we have the setups that allow you to also not misuse the very valuable resources that you're doing, as well as to have the most outcome out of that. So actually, anti-corruption strategy is a very important part of that. In our case, we have already an entity, an independent government entity that's looking at that. They have their own report for the entire country, and there is a lot of cooperation together with them. We do also a lot of work on that also when it comes to international taxation, to make sure that we have full cooperation with other countries in sharing information and data that allow us to do that. OECD is playing a very important role in that, and we are part of this international agenda. So yes, there is a lot of implementation that allow this to happen, but of course, at the core of transparency is to make sure that also you have very good systems that ensure that money are well spent, well reported, and that there is no misuse of that. Transparency is key for that.
Thank you. Mr. Naciri, anything to add? If not, I'm going to take more questions. Vous voulez dire quelque chose sur... Est-ce qu'il peut... Yeah, sure. Si vous avez une réponse pour ça, mais sinon, c'est pas grave, on va voir plus.
Non, juste pour ajouter peut-être un élément sur la dette, si vous permettez.
Oui, bien sûr, allez-y.
Pour revenir à ce sujet très important qui revient actuellement avec beaucoup plus d'insistance avec les crises successives et la pression qui se fait sur les finances publiques. Je crois que je peux citer que pour revenir à ce rôle des institutions supérieures de contrôle en matière de transparence budgétaire, mais en même temps d'alerte sur des situations, sur des tendances qui peuvent un peu risquer pour les finances publiques. À notre niveau, au niveau de la Cour des comptes, on suit ce sujet d'assez près, avec des missions qu'on réalise sur la gestion, la qualité de gestion de la dette, et on assure un suivi continu à travers nos différents reportings annuels sur le niveau de la dette, sur les risques que porte cette gestion. Et je crois qu'on contribue assez pour corriger certaines situations sur certaines tendances. Autre chose concernant peut-être la question, est-ce que trop de transparence tue la transparence? Je crois que peut-être on peut la poser un peu autrement. C'est pour dire que trop d'informations peut-être ou l'inflation de l'information qui peut ne pas être très bien ciblée, qui ne peut pas être très dirigée vers les vrais utilisateurs et de la qualité et de la pertinence dont ils ont besoin et attendent. Je crois que ça ne doit pas tuer la transparence, mais ça doit plutôt la renforcer. L'inflation de l'information, effectivement, ça peut conduire à des situations pas très compréhensibles. Merci.
Inflation de l'information. Allez-y, vous avez aussi un point.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to say something to this regarding this topic of too much transparency. And I think in many countries, we just need good basic transparency. So, the things we've heard today is, we need to have budgets with accurate information that are up to date and as complete as possible with coverage. We need to have information on, we need to have the budgets produced and published on time. And we need to have our audit institutions doing effective audits and effective knowledge of budget processes and core risks of non-transparency. So I think before we get to thinking about the risks of too much transparency, we have to make sure that we have the basics in place. And I do also agree with Mr. Naciri that there is a risk of too much information, but then that is also important that government organize and publish the information that will be useful to civil society so that people don't feel like they're swimming in a sea of unfiltered information.
And many times unfiltered PDFs that we cannot even put into Excel. This very important, we heard already before about priorities too, which is an important conversation to have. I think I saw another hand raised. So if we could go here first and then here. Go ahead. It'll be great if you could, behind you. Behind the last row. Sorry for pointing.
Raghid Mughrabi, American University of Beirut, finance lecturer. Maybe for Ms. Baer, within at least project management, and budgets are almost like project management from initiation, risk assessment, and so on and so forth. Are there various benchmarks that are used with countries that you may discuss, either where a regional country has done really well, and you would tell other countries, please do as well in terms of maybe timeliness or accuracy and so on? Are those used? That would be an interesting maybe response.
Thank you. Let me take one more, and then we can get back to the questions thing. Okay, we have, so I'll take those two.
Thank you, Suleiman Jidi. I'm the civil society actor in Marrakesh in the tourism and the economics, and as well managing director of a company in the tourism sector. So my question is about, from your diverse experience, what are the main elements that the countries in the MENA region do face, or behind the fact of not being enough transparent, especially for those countries that are at the lower bottom of the graphs that you started your presentation with? That would be interesting to know why there is no enough efforts to make everything transparent. Why? Thank you.
Thank you. So what explains that scores, especially what's the effect on civil society in the MENA region? And there was one more here.
Bonjour, je suis Marwan Bniaish, banquier, membre d'association à l'ISDR. Monsieur Traboulsi, vous avez parlé de la disponibilité de l'information. Ici, cette information disponible. Est-ce qu'il y a des outils pour savoir le niveau de crédibilité de cette information? Autrement dit, est-ce qu'il y a une procédure pour savoir le niveau de crédibilité de l'information?
Thank you. Let's start with that last question, and then we'll go backwards from them. Go ahead.
En fait, je voudrais réagir à deux questions en même temps. La première, c'est par rapport à ce qu'il faut faire concrètement pour pourquoi, le pourquoi. Voilà, pourquoi nous sommes en bas du tableau de ce classement. Je pense qu'il y a diverses raisons, à la fois d'ordre politique, d'ordre culturel, etc. Mais je voudrais focaliser sur la culture de transparence dans nos administrations publiques. Cette culture de transparence n'est pas très bien imprégnée. On a peur de divulguer l'information pour ne pas causer des problèmes parfois. Une fois, en 2011, lorsque le budget tunisien était beaucoup plus opaque que maintenant, on a protesté en tant que société civile. Pourquoi vous, auprès du ministère des Finances, pour publier la répartition régionale des investissements publics? C'est une information qui existe, mais qui n'a pas été publiée. Justement, la réponse était que le ministère des Finances, si jamais il publie une telle information, il va causer des protestations d'une région par rapport à une autre. Pourquoi vous avez donné 100 000 ici et 5 000 pour... Donc voilà, je pense que à côté des aspects d'ordre les textes de loi, le système budgétaire, etc., il y a aussi cet aspect de culture culture de transparence qui est très insuffisante auprès des administrateurs. Et là, on a, en tant que société civile, suggéré d'incorporer un cours sur la transparence budgétaire dans l'École nationale des finances qui forme les cadres des ministères des Finances pour que dans quelques années, peut-être que les responsables soient plus réceptifs et plus collaboratifs. Et puis, votre question par rapport à la crédibilité, malheureusement, on prend acte de l'absence de crédibilité a posteriori. C'est ça le problème. Mais maintenant, comme on dit, il y a un proverbe, on peut mentir à tout le monde une fois, on peut mentir à une personne tout le temps, mais on ne peut pas mentir à tout le monde de tout le temps. Et donc voilà, avec les prévisions, avec maintenant la capacité et l'expertise de la société civile, on peut prévoir, évaluer la crédibilité de l'information. Par rapport au taux de croissance, par exemple, si un budget se fait sur la base de 5 ou 6% de croissance, on connaît que le FMI fait des prévisions de croissance, la Banque mondiale, les autres institutions financières. Donc, à travers le recoupement de l'information, on pourrait évaluer ou apprécier la crédibilité de cette information budgétaire. Merci.
Great. I've been told somebody else needs to use the room, so there's no way for us to stay longer. But maybe a short answer to the question that was posed to you, Ms. Baer.
There we go. Yes, we have what good practices in public financial management, and there are several tools, just like the fiscal transparency evaluation, that help identify what good practices are. Of course, the PIFA assessment also has aspects of, what is good public financial management. So there are tools around the world, and those developed by the World Bank, the IMF, and others that help governments assess whether their actual budget processes, what are the strengths and weaknesses. And when we work with countries, we definitely work with countries within the region and also outside the region. So, countries that have more similar processes and more similar cultures, what can you do to improve budget processes? And there are also examples from outside the region. So usually it's a combination of the two. And I couldn't not comment and agree more on this entire discussion on fiscal transparency and budget accountability, on the importance of culture, and also in addition to the very important role of civil society, audit institutions, of the leaders and managers of the ministries of finances and budget offices as well, that there is a way to promote and to change the culture little by little, in part by taking these concrete steps to do some of the things that we've been talking about today. So it is difficult to change it, but definitely possible.
Thank you so much. I think that would be a fantastic way of closing. I have 10 points, but these are one-word points, so don't worry. We won't keep you here. So what we've heard today a little bit, it's also about credibility. It's important to look at the entire process. This combination of technical work from government and CSOs can be done, and it has been done. At the same time, progress is fragile. We've seen some progress that now is going backwards, as we've heard the case of Tunisia, but not to lose hope. The importance of independence of institutions and assigning resources, of this accountability culture, of working with champions at all levels of government, and of course of involving civil society throughout the accountability process. I thank you very much to all the panelists, to the European Union for their support. There's more to come in this project, and hopefully we can join forces throughout the upcoming years. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the IMF too.